Now we start our first panel today with Oscar Sjöstedt.
Nailed it.
Yes, from NetEnt. The title of the panel is Creating a Vision from AAA to Mobile. And let's start.
Thank you for the introduction. So, hi everyone and welcome to this lecture. And thank you all for coming here so early in the morning, especially after the party last night. I am humbled to have been asked to hold a lecture here at Digital Dragons. I've held many lectures before at schools in front of students, but never actually in front of actual professionals. So this is a first, but I'm sure it will be fine. To go over my background a bit first. So this is me before I started in the games industry. And as some of you might know, I am Oscar, and it's in the program you were given, so you should know. I'm originally from a small town outside of Malmö in the south of Sweden. And I've been working as an environment concept artist or a 2D artist to some extent in the games industry for almost 8 years now. Over the years, I picked up some tips and tricks that I'm hoping I can share with you here today. My background, however, isn't in illustrative art though. Until I was around 20, I didn't really know what to do with myself. And when you don't know what to do with yourself, you study graphic design for a while, and where you get to learn such useful skills as turning a banana into an alphabet, but not much else, however. So during my time there, I found out that I'd rather do illustrations than the assignments we were given. And naturally, I dropped out of school and started freelancing and working on my own stuff instead. I quickly started freelancing for like mobile games and indie games in the region. And after doing that for half a year, I took a course in 3D art, also in Malmö. It was great fun, but it wasn't 2D, which I still really wanted to do. However, one day at the 3D course, some people from Ubisoft dropped by, and I pushed all my 2D stuff on them and said, like, please hire me as whatever, I can make coffee for you, or no, I just want to be around you. And that's actually how I got my first job as a concept artist at Ubisoft. So, after working for Ubisoft for around 6 years, I think, I wanted to try something different. I had worked on all Ubisoft titles and tried all the stuff that they offered. And me and my girlfriend, we moved from Malmö up to Gothenburg, where I took a job at NetEnt. I still freelance a lot, and I try to take on as many interesting projects as I can. So over the years that I've worked in the industry, I worked on board games, slot games of course, video games, card games, old school pen and paper, RPGs, movies, yeah, basically games across all genres. I worked on franchises like Tom Clancy, Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Mutant, Magic the Gathering, and movies like The Maze Runner. However, when it comes to concept art to production, one thing that all these projects have had in common is that whether it's for a small indie title or big AAA production, it's one of the key elements to success is always being able to iterate and create a wide variety of concepts, no matter the style or the project you're assigned to. This is, of course, a big challenge that many productions struggle with. But it is a problem that has already been solved by 3D and level art in many cases. In 3D at Ubisoft, we can build huge expanse worlds that reuse the same assets over and over to create like a smart system for building worlds, and we call this modularity. As games grow in size, in scope, the demand for modularity increases. The benefit of modularity is that you can reuse the same assets over and over and create new things. And also, the 3D artist will have an easier time to implement your concepts and recreating them in 3D if you're actually reusing the same assets as they do in your art. But modularity doesn't just have to be for 3D and level art though. It can be a powerful tool for concept artists as well. So the question is then, how do we create modularity for concept arts? This in turn raises another question, like, how do we do concept art? We first need to find that out. Well, there are many ways one can go about creating a picture. You can paint it from scratch, like some sort of madman. You can use a 3D base or photobash it, or you can use a combination of any of those three. So now that we know how to create concept art, how can we achieve modularity in art? Well, when I worked at Ubisoft, I made many friends, and one friend in particular, Tom Garden, him and I, we started creating an asset library together, where every image, every 3D model, every picture we did, we cut up into pieces, labeled it, and started collecting them in an organized file system called our asset database, or asset library. So here to the left, you can see like a bunch of plants that we've cut up, and here to the right, you can see like first an image of a 3D model, and then the corresponding OBJ file containing the textures and everything. So if we were to, for example, if we wanted to paint a bedroom, then we would just go into our asset library and search for beds and the drawers and wardrobes and whatnot, and perhaps just model up a scene really quickly and then paint on top of that. This is a really quick and smart way of working, and it has definitely sped up the workflow of many concept artists that I know. So when you need to start an image, the first thing we do is just we browse through our asset library to see if we have anything there that fits the bill already. This saves time from having to browse internet and Google search every image for hours and hours. So I have two pictures here today that I've done that I'd like to walk you through, just to show my process when it comes to modularity in art and how I create pictures. The right image is quite dark, as it turns out. No matter. So this is basically how I start an image. I block everything out in hard values, basically creating masks for every element. But it's still pretty recognizable. The image to the left is like some sort of fantasy tower in a valley, and the image to the right is like a shipwreck next to some waterfalls. This is nothing that I show to art directors or anything though. But the next step is, because I have everything masked out in separate layers, I can just link the light to each layer and create like a value mask with light and shadow. And that could look something like this. And this is really a simple step. What I've done is just go over everything with a grayscale just to get like an initial feel and direction. And I think this is also perhaps the most important step, because this is the groundwork and the foundation for the rest of the drawing. And this is generally what I would show to an art director or a 3D artist or a level artist to ask if this is the direction I should be going in. Usually along with like a color reference image saying like, imagine this but with these colors, sort of. And that's usually how I work. However, for the next step, I just lay in colors with a brush that, like base colors, with a brush that has heavy hue and saturation jitter. This creates a pretty noisy image that isn't really readable, but it's just a good base for color. And because I have everything separated, I have my lights separated, I have my shadows separated, I can then just pull those on top of this layer and set the lights to linear dodge or color dodge, the shadows to multiply, and it would look something like this. So here I basically have all my lights and all my shadows. A very rough first draft, of course, but it's basically all there already. And because I've used a very jittery hue saturation brush, I have lots of color information that are both in the light and in the shadow. It's just not monotone. I think this is a good time to talk about brushes as well. So these are the brushes I use. I have my brushes divided into 4 categories: main, blend, texture, and stamp. My main brushes are just for drawing line and value. My blend brushes is just to eliminate cleanliness of 3D models, for example, or reference photos. And my texture brushes is just to create noisy and nice texture and visual interest in areas. And then at the end we have stamp brushes, which are, well, it is what it says. It's grass brushes, bird brushes, shane brushes, etc. Brushes that have a very specific use, but not many other uses. I normally just use 3 or 4 of these brushes, and that's it. And these are some of the results that I get with these brushes. I normally just, when I paint concepts, I normally don't just pick a color and paint that color. What I do is I set the brush to clone stamp or the mixer brush, which I have here. And that creates a wider range of texture than just picking a color, painting that color. And then, just as I did before, because I use these at a pretty high opacity level, they're pretty opaque. I can just lock transparency and paint into them as well, and use them in turn as masks, and paint over them with more mixer brushes and more clone stamping, for example. When it comes to texture, this is usually how I group my texture. I don't want texture in isolation. I always try to group my shapes, and group my forms, and group my lights. So even though there's a lot of texture in my painting, it won't be as noisy, because I try to group the bits. So the right image, for example, sort of reads like 2 blocks instead of a million little dots. And that's what I'm going for. So back to the process. Oh, right, references as well. When I walk my dog in the morning, I usually come across various nice light scenarios. And these are some of the light scenarios and references that I used to create the 2 images that you're about to see. It can be things like moss or a single plant, or maybe I liked how the light like sort of comes through the leaf there, in the bottom middle picture, or like how the light falls on the grass up there on the top, or on the rocks there. These are things I'm looking for. I'm looking for both isolated references, like, for example, a flower, but also light information that I can then use. And sometimes I clone stamp directly from references, or sometimes I include or try to incorporate the reference somehow into my image. Or sometimes I just use it as a visual aid. Whenever I'm stuck, I can just look at the reference like, oh yeah, that's the color I should be using, or oh yeah, that's what a rock looks like. So, back to the drawing, I think. Oh, okay, there it goes. Right, so this is where we left the process. For the next step, I'm going to start laying in some texture and try to separate my elements and just make the image a bit nicer looking in general. At this stage as well, it's generally been approved by an art director or a client or someone who knows what they want. So if they don't like what they're seeing, then I go back and I tweak my base colors, basically. Because the colors you see in these pictures, they're decided by the very noisy hue saturation color layer that I put in at the very start. So if they don't like what they see, I have all my layers intact. I can just use a hue saturation modifier layer and just shift things around and create completely different color combinations. So going forward, I start laying in a texture with my texture brushes that I showed you. I also drop in a photo in the background for the right image. And yeah, that's about it. Let's see what that looks like. It can look something like this. So going back and forth, I just put in some placeholder waterfalls, some moss, and some noisy texture that I showed you how to do before with the mixer brush or the clone stamping brush. I like to sample my own images as much as I can as well, to just sort of build on this, like, well, keep iterating upon the assets that you already have in your own image or the references that you have. And this is a further step. I keep laying in some more moss on the image on the right. I try to figure out the lights that I want in both images. But actually, it hasn't changed that much from the first sketches in black and white that I showed you. It's basically still the first image. And that's why it's so important to actually spend most of the time doing black and white sketches that you like. Because all the bits that come afterward, they're pretty monotonous. Like, it's like an architect building a house. Like, once the drawing is done, which is the black and white and the color layer, then all that remains is just filling in the blanks and adding detail to all the areas that are missing. And that's not the hardest part. The hardest part is always just figuring out what you want to draw and how you want to light it, and what you want to convey as well. In the image to the left, I have lots of round billowing shapes. It's a friendlier environment. In the image to the right, I have lots of pointy bits. It communicates more danger and action, perhaps, like the water is in motion in a whole different way, while on the left, the water is still and calm. You can also see in the image in the left how I've used one of the grass brushes that I had in my brush set. And again, it's just using mixer brush and to create some nice variety, color variety and texture in the foreground. Going forward, I add more bits where I think it's needed. Try to incorporate more texture in the shadows and in the moss in the background. And I start just tweaking little bits here and there. Things that stick out to me, I either lift forward or knock back and just try to make everything sit. By the way, if you guys have any questions during this, then just throw them out there. I'm happy to answer questions. I move things around a little where I feel like, oh, that house should be 5 pixels to the right or 5 pixels to the left. But other than that, I just try to follow my black and white sketch as closely as I can. As we go forward, lay in some more lights, some more colors, foreground, add a little branch to the tree that's lying down. Oh yeah, in this step, as you can see, the water on the left here changes. That's actually just a filter in Photoshop that I thought kind of did the job. And again, like if I can save half a day not having to paint a water reflection, then it's all good. At the end of the day, it's like what the client needs and not so much about your own artistic integrity, I think. Yeah, and keep moving forward, adding more detail. I'm not super happy with the leaves here in the left image. As you can see, they go away in this picture. So I try to just leave them out entirely, but they come back. Just you wait. Here I try some grass. It's not doing it for me either. But as you can see, it's like not much happening between each stage. It's a bit more texture, it's a bit more light. Try to detail up some bits in the foreground. I tweak some colors with like a saturation and vibrance layer. Here the leaves are back, and you can probably recognize that they look very much like one of the reference photos I took, which I just basically painted just from one of those photos. Also in the image here to the, let's see where did I add that? I add another image to in the right image. See, the clicker is a bit slow here. Yeah, here we go. In the right picture, down there in the right here, I add, holy shit. I add another photo that I just found in my asset library. I didn't have to add it, but I thought it sort of fit the angle and what I was going for. There it is. Yeah, I add some leaves. Again, it's like all of these things are in my brushes. Add some more atmospheric perspective, some rays of sunlight in the one image to the left. Just try to keep things sort of intact and orderly. You can see the image to the right still has a few more steps. Not super happy with the contrast, so I try to knock it back a little. So that's those two images. And if you zoom in on both of these images, you can see like there's not that much detail in the areas that you actually think might have a lot of detail. It's just noisy texture brushes sort of forming an impressionistic pattern, sort of. But zoomed out, it looks all right. And I think that's what I'm getting at. It's using all these textures and assets together. You can sort of form a patchwork with things that look all right viewed from a distance, but up close, they're a bit noisy. So what's next? Now that we have one image, I can start cutting this image up in turn and start creating new assets from that. So this image here that I just showed you how to do, it can perhaps become a scary windmill, or maybe an entire fantasy city, or maybe a spooky swamp. I don't know. I think working like this really enables us to do quick and smart iterations of our concepts and really brings modularity to the core of what we do as concept artists. So always keep a shared folder where you have all the assets from previous projects, and that you keep updating and keep organized as you go along. If you take care of your assets folder, it will take care of you. I'm not sure what the time is, but I hope you learned something from this talk and that it wasn't a complete waste of your time. Thank you for your time and interest.
Thank you, Oscar. Do we have some questions from audience?
Hi, so my question is, because you worked for a while at Ubisoft, what elements of knowledge and skills are the most important right now that you work in the mobile games?
I think a lot of what I said about keeping an assets folder and just trying to work with lots of modularity in mind just goes for mobile games as well. Like, no matter if you're a small team of 15 people or like 1,000 people like we were on Ubisoft, I think the same things are valid. It's just the scale is different. Like, even for a mobile game, you have to be really smart because maybe you only have one 2D artist or two 2D artists, but you still want to create a lot of content. Then you have to reuse things over and over, and so I think working smart and modular is one thing that I brought with me from Ubisoft to mobile.
Thanks.
Anyone? Questions?
Amazing talk, by the way.
Thank you.
So my question is, when you start a concept, you start with shapes, right?
Yes,
It's like,
actually start with, there's one step before the thing I showed you, which is, I don't have it in the talk, sorry, but it's basically a very, very loose scribble. It's unrecognizable as a drawing, but for example, for these images, see if I can go back to the first image. It would just be like, oh, I want a mast here, I want something in the left part of this image and something on the right part, and some lines going in. But after that, I just create everything in like shapes, yeah. So just black and white, 100% brush, going over the shapes, and keep everything separate. Like when you render out the 3D model with color passes and stuff, like they don't have to be gray like I do. They can be like green and red and whatever. But it's basically the same principle. Like, you're creating masks for all the stuff you want to do later. And it's also super helpful because when you have a mask for everything, like, you can just move things around. Like, art directors want you to like move, you know, a wall or something, then like, well, everything is already masked out, so it's super easy to just shift things around.
okay. But my question is, actually, you have the whole image already set up in your mind, or you are like, of course, it has some improvisation always, but do you have the general idea in your mind when you are defining the shapes about the mood, about what they represent?
Pretty much. That's why I spend a lot of time. All right, here we go. One more. A lot of time on. Oh no. A lot of time on the black and white stage, where I just lay in the values and the lights and the shadows. So this stage is the one that takes a lot of time at the start. Or it's not super time consuming to create one of these images, but I sort of want to have this feeling. But then as I go along, it's perhaps not, it doesn't become just this, but it's like pretty close. So I try to reach a state where I'm happy with this image. And this is the image that I show my clients as well. And it's not just so that I know what I want to do, it's also so the clients know what they can expect. Because if I show an image like this to, when I'm making a book cover or something, for example, and the client is like, wow, yeah, that's really good, I want that. But then when I'm finished, it looks completely different, and you know, they're not going to hire me again. So that's why I also try to spend a lot of time on this stage just to make it look like I want it to look when it's done.
Right, thanks.
Another question?
Hello, thank you for your speech. How much time do you spend on building your assets library, and how much time you spend to update it?
I mean, I don't have to. It's updated automatically sort of after each image I do. But after each image, I spend maybe not that long. Like, again, I have all the masks, so every asset is already masked out when I do it like this. So I spend maybe 1 or 2 hours after each image. And just cleaning everything up and putting it in the assets folder, labeling it and stuff like that. But other things, like if I need to create a new 3D model, for example, that sort of happens during the reference phase as well. So the same goes for like pictures like these. As I take them and decide which images I should let me be influenced by, I also like mask them out. So like these tulips on the far left, I have those masked out as I took the image and stuff like that. And the same goes for like the leaves and the moss and things like that. So I mean, it sort of happens organically. So it's not something that I do at the very end. And another thing like that I can say about references while we're at it is I take a lot of reference photos, like probably hundreds, but at the end I just remove so many of them. I try to sort out as much noise as possible. I just want like around 10 references influencing me, because I don't really need more usually, because if I get more than 10 references, then it starts cluttering my mind and I start like becoming confused by what I'm looking at. So fewer references is probably better sometimes.
Any more questions?
Thank you. When you paint some backgrounds or something that is quite complex, do you ever have to simplify this after the process is done so that it would fit into the mobile game, because they usually have less detail?
Yeah, sometimes, but like again, like going back to this image, it's something I don't like making big design decisions at the end of an image, because that's a waste of time, of everyone's time, of the client's time and of my time. So if I can at all, it happens of course sometimes, I try to solve all the design problems at this phase. And I try to show, like, make the client understand that, like, or well, they can put any of these images. If they wanted one of these images as a background image, just put it in. It's going to look pretty much like that, but with some color on top of it, so they can get a feel for what it would look like. So, yeah. So I try to solve all the question marks at this stage. I hope that answered your question.
Do we have some more questions? No, we're good. Okay, so I'd like to thank you, Oscar.
Yeah,
I need
thank
some
you.
applause from the audience.